You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening, everybody. How are we all? Welcome to another episode of Haunted Histories on Parasearch Radio. Hope you enjoy tonight's instalment, which I will begin shortly. So, I would like to think everyone who listened to the show on Prague last week found it interesting. It was certainly a bit of a mind bender to put together for you all. So many periods in history that I could have covered, and many that I had to omit to keep it timely. If anyone has their own supernatural experiences of Prague and the Czech Republic, please do let me know. Anyway, hot on the heels of the Fort Horsted competition, which we announced last week, there's only another one for you lovely lot. This time from Trident Paranormal, for 2 tickets to their investigation on the 6th of April to Her Majesty's Prison, Shepton Mallet. As always, just go to the Parasearch page, like, comment and share the post and throw that paranormal hat into the ring. You never know. You might win a trip to investigate Shepton Mallet. But do check all the terms and conditions and blah, blah, blah. You know the score. I'm not going to say them all. Anyway, the winner's going to be drawn on the 3rd of April on the Paranormal Concept Show. Good luck to all of you. So tonight's guest is actually a proper bona fide TV star, I'll have you know. Anyone who... Boo, Kaz. You are eager tonight, aren't you? You said you were looking forward to this one. I'm impressed. Anyway, anyone who ever watched Ghost Asylum or who saw the last series of Haunted Towns and even caught their first ever filmed investigation, which I genuinely found hysterical. All I'm saying is Chasey Ray, twerking. Anyway, Ghostland, Tennessee. Will probably recognise him. Let's play the interview, but before I do, I have to apologise. You may hear kids shouting in this. I had to record it in an afternoon and my kids were there. I do apologise, but you'll get the gist of it. Blind. Okay, and now, it's a bit of a different show tonight because you're not going to hear me talk for half an hour or so about history because I've got a fellow history nerd on the phone with me right now, Mr. Scott Porter of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. Good evening, Scott. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to talk to you guys about history.
Oh, thank you so much. I say it's a real pleasure to have you. You don't do much in the UK promotion-wise, do you guys?
We have not, but the network is trying to get out there, and our show gets aired on. I guess it's either ID or
Quest Red.
What was the other channel?
Quest Red.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quest Red.
Yeah.
And and so we're getting out there, and but we haven't got to travel to the UK yet, but we definitely have it on our bucket list of locations to get to.
Well, you know who to call when you get out here.
Well, I certainly do, and believe you me, us history nerds have to stick together.
We do. We've got to fight the world, stick together and fight the world. Although I do have to say, I don't want to burst your bubble and really deflate your ego straight away, Porter. But when I told a couple of friends of mine, I've got one of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers coming on my show. Yeah, the first question they ask is it Chris?
Well, of course, that's just it. It's people, everybody out there, they're, I'm the history nerd, and he's the muscle man, and so people love to look at the muscles. That's just the way it is.
Well, I did say to the person who said, actually, no, one of the words she uses is it the muscly one, and I said, to be fair, if you follow them on Instagram, they're all pretty ripped now. But no, it's not the muscly one. So I go, oh, can you ask them to have the muscly one on at some point? I said, I'll ask. Yeah. I will ask.
Well, there you go. Well, you'll just have to get him on here, and he can tell you all about them and how he works out and what he does to get those.
I said no. I said it's Porter, the history one, because him and I are going to talk about history for ages. So, they still people know who TWC are over here. You are quite well known.
Well, that's great.
So it always I think it always surprises my some of my American guests when they come on. I had Dalen from the Ghost Brothers recently, and I said to him, "No, people know who the Ghost Brothers are. Really? What, in the UK? Oh yeah, people know who you are." My God. So people do know who you are, and there's been a lot of people sort of interested for this show, especially as we're going to be talking about Salem, which. It's quite a well-known thing for historians and for paranormal enthusiasts as well. But before we start talking about Salem specifically, Porter, how did you get into being a paranormal investigator?
Oh my gosh, that's a wonderful question. It's throughout my life I've always been around the spirit world from a religious standpoint. Growing up in a Christian home, my parents are wonderful Christian people. My father is a preacher. He's a pastor of the church, and so I've always been exposed to that. And I am very grounded in my religion and in my spiritual connection to the Lord. And and being involved in that, I've been around death my entire life. It's a fact of life, and it's one of those things that we have to deal with. And it's an inevitability for all of us. And so in doing that, and like here in the South, when you have a death in the family, everybody comes together after the wake and after the burial, and everybody kind of hangs out, and you talk, you reminisce, and it's one of those things of just coping with it, and it's kind of like a group therapy. And so you're telling stories, and it always comes up that people start talking about spirits and ghost stories. And it's ironic to me that even people in the Christian world who are very in some cases very, very negative against talking about anything ghostly, it's how it comes up, and how everybody has a story that they can't explain. And so having those stories and seeing more and more people and hearing more and more people talk about these stories, it always intrigued me. And how they had these experiences, and I didn't understand why I had never had an experience like that. And so throughout time I was hearing this, and then one day when I was in college, I'd come home for the weekend. I was at my parents' house, and I woke up on Saturday morning. I come home Friday night. I woke up on Saturday morning, and when I woke up, I smelled breakfast. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm hungry. This smells great. I can't wait to eat, a good home cooked meal. It sure beats the tar out of some ramen noodles and all that kind of stuff that I've been eating in school. And so I'm walking down the hallway, and their house is a new house. It's a ranch house, but it's built on our farm. And so I'm walking down the hallway, and I look in the kitchen, and as I'm looking into the kitchen across the dining room into the kitchen, and I see my mother standing there at the stove, and she's wearing a pink house coat, and I can hear the skillet sizzling. I can hear the exhaust fan running, and I can smell I can smell the breakfast smells. I can smell biscuits. I can smell bacon and sausage and those strong breakfast smells. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so good. I can't wait. And so I turned into the bathroom to freshen up. And I wasn't in there just for a second, and I turned around and come back out. And when I came out of the bathroom, all those smells were gone. So there was no smell, there was no sound, and I thought, okay, what's going on? And I thought, well, I'm still hungry, so I'm going to go in here. Mom always put me a plate of food. Even when they were finished, she would leave me a plate of food in the microwave or in the oven. And so I walked in there and I looked at the stove, and the stove was completely clean. There was nothing on it. I opened the oven. There was nothing in the oven.
Mm-hmm.
I went over and opened the microwave. There's nothing in the microwave. So I yelled out to them and tried to find out where they went to, and I didn't hear anybody. And I went over to the sink to get me a cup of water or something. I looked at the sink. There was nothing in the sink, no dishes, no nothing. And that was kind of odd, And and then I opened the dishwasher, and there was nothing in there. And I thought, well, I know they were just in here cooking. And so I yelled out again. I checked the basement and everywhere. They were nowhere to be found. I opened the door to the garage to look and see if they're out there, and their car was gone. And I thought, okay, well, maybe they had to leave in a hurry, but that doesn't explain everything. None of that stuff registered to me. I was just thinking, oh, maybe they had to leave in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And so I called the cell phone, and my dad answered, and I said, hey, where's breakfast? And I said, you guys leave me something to eat here? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I woke up and I smelled breakfast. Mom was in there cooking. So I was going to eat something if y'all left me something.
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not there. I said, well, I know you're not here, but I wanted to eat. And he's like, hold on, let me talk to your mother.
Yeah.
And so he put my mom on the phone. And so then he was like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I woke up, I saw you in here cooking, and I was going to eat something. I just want to see if you left me anything. She goes, we're not there. I'm not cooking. I'm like, I just saw you. You were in here. She goes, no, honey. She said, we've been gone for hours. We're out here shopping. They were in another city. And I said, I just saw you standing in here at the stove wearing a pink house coat, cooking breakfast, and I could smell it. I could hear it. I said, I just saw you here. And she told me, she said, honey, she said, we have been gone since before day. And if somebody is in that house cooking breakfast in a pink house coat, you need to get out of there and call the police, because I don't even own a pink house coat.
That was going to be my question, actually. Yeah. Wow.
So it was like it was a full-blown experience that involved sound, smell, and visual. Yeah. And so it was kind of funny. All that happened to me, and I had a real hard time understanding and coping with it. But it was like, wow, this was my experience. And so then over the years, whenever we get together for family and so like that, my mom would get me to tell that story. Mm. And it was, I can't remember when it was now, but I was telling that story of what happened to me, and we were all in that room, all in there together. And my mom said, "Oh my gosh, I just remembered something." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, back when your father and I first got married, which this year's their 50th wedding anniversary. Oh. She said, when we first got married, said your grandmother gave me a pink house coat, a pink robe. Right. And she said, I don't know where that thing's at. And of course, at that point in time, my grandmother was still alive and all that, so there was no connection there. But it was very odd to finally hear that piece of detail come into the story, because the pink house coat was relevant. And so, okay, so now I have another piece of the puzzle. So what is it that I experienced? And so that kind of got me very interested. And then years later, me and my buddies we all hung out, and Doogie and I would always talk about stuff paranormal. And he had a house that was haunted that he lived in, and we always said that we should get cameras and try to capture some of it. We never did. Yeah. We went separate ways, but when Chris went off and did the Ghost Hunters Academy, and he came back and got some buddies together, and they were doing the investigations. He ran into Doogie and was talking to Doogie about it. Doogie got involved, and Doogie got a hold of me and got me involved. And it kind of just exploded from there. When you put us all together, it just kind of took off. Oh. And so that's kind of what got me going. The first story there is kind of, I want to give the detail because that's such an intriguing moment. Yeah. But then how we evolved is kind of just, it's one of those things that just all came together at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the fact you'd always been around, in effect, the spiritual side of things with your upbringing, and with the fact that your dad's a local pastor and everything else. Pastor, however, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but do you ever find that conflicts with your interest at the paranormal? Because as you said, a lot of people who have got a strong religious faith find people who believe in the paranormal as being quite almost, it's Satan, it's wrong, right. It's witchcraft and all that kind of thing. Do you ever find it conflicts with your beliefs, or do you? Is it it's part of it? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, it does make perfect sense, because I have had to fight that battle. And what I tell people when I talk to them is that we all have stories of stuff we can't explain. And if we write every bit of it off as something demonic, or we write every bit off as something shouldn't be involved in or shouldn't try to research, then I think we are inhibiting our growth, our knowledge, and our ability to understand our world. Because I tell everyone that I have my faith is in one hand, and it's very strong, and I know what I believe, and I know where my heart stands. And on the other side, I have my science and my love of discovery and research. And all these people, even the most religious people in the world, they have these stories that they can't explain. Are all of those connected to the spirit world, or are some of those connected to our world, and it's just something we don't understand? Because it's I think 90% or maybe even 95% of what we experience and we deem paranormal is paranormal by definition. It's the normal, just not yet understood.
Yeah. And
then there's that little bit of it that we glimpse and see and that we get to experience that is supernatural. And that's what that's what everybody wants to experience. We all have a fascination with death, no matter who we are in the world. Of this fascination, because no one can tell us what exactly happens on the other side. We have people that have a connection there that say, okay, this is how it is and this is how it is. But for us, it's not personal. It's not a personal experience. We can't look at it and see it like we can look at TV and watch the news, or we can go somewhere and visit another location and see it and experience it for ourselves. This is something that we're all going to have to experience, but we don't get to go and get a taste of it before we go. So I think everyone has curiosity. So this conflict exists. When people say, well, if you're a man of faith, how do you go and research this stuff? How do you interact with it when we're not supposed to? And my voice on that is that I'm not looking to disrupt my religion and my faith with God. I'm looking to discover what these energies are around us. I'm looking to experience other people are experiencing and show that to the world and say, hey, for those of you that don't believe that there's another world out there, there's this energy and there's a spirit world and things exist, I want to be able to take something and say, hey, look, this is what I've experienced, this is what I've captured, and I know it's not going to prove it to you, but this is a piece of the puzzle that will help you understand why I'm looking there and why you should look there as well.
Okay. It's interesting what you say about don't look at, it's a lot. Some people do look at everything as they automatically assume it's bad or it's demonic or it's. I actually think even some of the spirits that do things that people go, oh, it attacked me. I actually don't think necessarily it's attacking. I think it's more a case of the example I give is a small child who can't speak. They are going to grab you. They are going to tug your jacket. They are going to throw things at you. They'll do whatever. They are literally in your face, yelling at you to pay attention to them. And for some reason, you can't hear them. So they're going to do every single thing they can. And you were talking to my kids earlier. It sounds a bit strange, but my kids wanted to talk to Porter. And my 4-year-old can't always talk properly. So sometimes he does grab me and dig his nails in my arm if I've not heard him or whatever. It's not necessarily nasty. It's an attention thing. It's not and I think that is one of the misconceptions sometimes of the spirit world, is that people think it's automatically on the negative side. It's not. It's just them trying to get their message across or trying to get heard because we're not hearing them.
Right.
No, that's interesting, because I know that when I've sort of met people who've got very strong religious beliefs, and some of them, when I've told them what I do as a hobby, they can't get away from me fast enough. And I kind of think, if you listen to me, I'm not sort of doing rituals or anything like that. I am just maybe having a conversation with something that you can't see. But it's interesting. It is interesting, that side of it. Okay.
Yes.
So you're known as the profiler for Tennessee Wraith Chasers. Where did that come from? What does it mean?
That's funny because I've always been kind of considered the historian, and by saying historian, that means that what I dig into is the research of the history behind the location and how it kind of connects to the superstition or the supernatural events there. It also kind of, and how it kind of affects that, and how it predispositions people to believe something is going to happen, or some interaction is connected to a specific event in history, which is not always the case.
No.
And so as that role evolved, it was like, okay, historian doesn't really say everything that I do. It doesn't really say all of this combination or this connection between history and modern interaction that we're having. So there was a term that we were looking for that kind of described it a little bit better. And so in Haunted Towns, our producers, like he came up and he said, you're more the profiler. He said, you may be doing the history, but he said, you're more the profiler. You kind of put the backstory together. And I was like, that's right. I mean, that's what I do. And so, although there's that love of history and there's that deep desire to research and find out all those hidden stories that exist back in time, taking those stories and putting them together to kind of create that image of, and that roadmap of what's happened at that location, what may have scarred the ribbon of time and the location that may have imprinted itself there, and how that affects our current interaction and how that affects our investigation if we're trying to prove or disprove something, makes me more of developing the profile of the case. Okay. So that's how I became the profiler.
Okay. So how much research do you tend to do personally before you go to a new location?
That depends. If it depends on the nature of the case, for one. We've had cases before where we've had people who were either tormented by something or who were being physically affected by something. And in those type of cases, there's quite a bit of research that goes into it. There's research of the history of the location. There's research of events that occurred at the location. There's geological research. There's research of modern things that may be affecting the location. Like I know there was a case years ago we had where a child was having issues that they couldn't explain. He was talking about things that he had never been exposed to. And so in my research of that location, I couldn't find anything that was really monumental in history that would have been connected to that specific home. The area had some stuff to it, but there was really nothing going on throughout the area, but it was more just that specific home. Yeah. So then I turned to a geological survey, and I couldn't find anything that really stood out there except for there was ley lines that were nearby. And then the other thing that I found, there was no high tension power lines there. But when we got to location, we found that there was a standing EMF field about 3 foot off the ground that was as strong as if you were standing under some high powered transmission lines. And so that kind of revealed to me that, okay, there's an energy here at a certain level. This child happens to be about 3 feet tall. So is that energy so strong, and him being exposed to that all day long, what's causing the problem? And so we kind of relayed that we weren't real sure if it was something supernatural, but we did say that we thought that maybe you should take him out of that environment for a while, because that energy was around the house and in the house, but not in the street. And as I got away from the house, it wasn't as strong. So they pulled that child out of the house, and those actions where he was behaving that way stopped after a while. So, maybe that was it. But that took a lot of research.
Yeah. When
it goes to researching the stuff for the show, we're in and out. We're moving around so quickly that I can't do all that research. So we have a research team that helps us. I've got a wonderful fellow up in Boston, or near in Massachusetts, Tim Weisberg, who does a lot of research for us. And really kind of does a lot of the digging for us. A great person, love him to death. And Stephanie actually helps him a little bit. Stephanie Burke helps him a little bit with that too, and she's always been instrumental in the show. So that's a lot that goes on. And then we have people who work with us in each season who are researchers as well that help put that together. So I'm not I'm not trying to overlap my research when we're going from place to place each week.
Right.
That gets very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can get confusing.
I can imagine. The only reason I ask is that this is a conversation that I've had with an awful lot of paranormal investigators. Is it actually harmful knowing history of a place before you investigate it? Because as you said before, you can go in with certain preconceptions that I mean, one of our pivotal figures in the UK is Anne Boleyn, who was one of Henry VIII's wives. And the amount of times people have gone to buildings that she's known to have lived in or frequented, have seen what they believe to be an apparition. Oh, it's Anne Boleyn. And my sort of argument is like, well, it may not be. It may actually just be a woman who lived there. You can't assume it's always the famous person that you see. It could be one of her ladies in waiting. It could be someone who lived there 100 years later. It could be, and the argument is that knowing the history can push your mind in a certain direction.
Yes.
However, I find knowing the history of a place is when I can say to someone, no, it can't have been that because, for example, that nuclear bunker in Essex that I mentioned to you earlier, Kelvin and Hatch. Somebody was saying, he said, I'm feeling this place was built around 1948. And I said, no, it was built 51, 52. So knowing that, I can then, but one of the problems I have, without sounding arrogant, and you probably have a similar thing, because I've read so much different history stuff, it's actually very hard for me to go into somewhere and not know something, not have some knowledge, because I'm quite well read about the whole history in general. Even if I don't specifically say I'm going to this building, so I'm going to look up who lived here, what events happened here, and I will probably know something. And one of my favourite experiences I ever had was at a air traffic control tower in East Anglia. It was a US Air Force bomber base in World War II, and a friend of mine and I were looking at this map on the wall. We hadn't even turned the lights off. We were just wandering around, getting our sort of feel for the place, and seeing all the exhibits as a museum before we turned the lights out. And this is this amazing map from the 1940s of where the different bases were. And she said to me, she goes, "Oh, why so many in East Anglia?" And I was explaining to her why, from a historical perspective, why so many have been put in East Anglia. And the two of us, as I was saying it I can't do an American accent, so please don't judge me for this. We heard a disembodied voice in the background turn around and go, "Yep." And we both sort of went, and we went racing off to check if someone was hiding or whatever. But this voice was right next to us in this room we were in. And there was nobody else there. Of course, that one time we didn't have any recorders going because we were just wandering around, chatting, looking at stuff before we started our investigation. But as she said, it was my knowledge that acted as the trigger for this spirit to agree with the reasons why these bomber bases were there. So I kind of see history it can be, I think if you're not able to put it almost out of your mind a bit when you're investigating and not have preconceived, but then again, it can be used to sort of guide questions as well. So if you think, it could be this, you could ask a question that's applicable.
Yes.
I don't know, that makes sense. That's quite sort of badly thought out.
But... no, absolutely it makes sense. And you're absolutely correct, 100%. That's the one thing about in my position is that if we're going into a place and I learn the history, a lot of times I won't share all of that or share all of my discoveries, because as we're investigating, if you have one person who knows those aspects, that person, of course, is predispositioned. Yeah. But if that person remains neutral and external to that particular investigation, and those who are not as informed of the history, who only have enough to be able to navigate the investigation, then those experiences that they have become very relevant when they come up with a conclusion or an answer or some type of supernatural interaction that confirms a piece of information that the profiler, historian, or the person who is knowledgeable has acquired. And if you watch our Gettysburg episode, that came to light in one of the final scenes. I was actually shooting a Gettysburg battlefield weapon that was picked up off the battlefield. And the guys were inside the house and inside the barn doing the investigation.
Yep. And
one of the things that I had learned earlier in the day when I was speaking to the guys on the hill who were doing the reenactment, they were telling me that those guns, that if you loaded that gun with a double charge and fired it, that it would sound like a cannon.
Yep.
And so I didn't tell the guys that, and I didn't tell them when I was going to do that. But for the last round that I shot out, it was getting late at night. They said, "This is the last time we're going to shoot." And I said, "Listen, I asked the museum curator and owner of the weapon. I said, would you be opposed to me firing a double charge out of this weapon?" And he goes, "No, absolutely not. That's fine." And so I double charged the rifle, and I shot it. And so the guys were inside. They had no clue what was going on. Well, they got an EVP after they asked, "What was that noise?" that said cannon. So I went inside and I walked in. And I said, "So did you guys get anything?" And Chris was like, "Well, we got something, but it really didn't make sense and it didn't really connect. But it was interesting because when we asked, what that noise was, it said cannon, and we all know that was just a gun." And that's when I said, "Hold on just a minute. I didn't tell you guys something."
Yeah.
But earlier, I was told that if I fired a double charge, that it would sound like a cannon, and that last shot was a double charge. Yeah. So that really brought it together, and it was like, okay, this is really cool, because now not only do we have an interaction that is intelligent, we have an interaction of something that recognizes the difference between the sound of the first times that I shot the weapon to the last time that I shot the weapon, and it was confirmed by someone who is knowledgeable of how the weapons sound that's living. So it was really neat to bring all that together.
Well, I can tell you, Porter, that my 8-year-old and I did watch that episode, and when that particular bit happened, he did turn to me and he went, "It said that!" So there you go. I do remember that bit, yeah. I think my other favourite bit of that episode was the who was the president bit.
Oh, my gosh. That was amazing. That was
quite a sort of moment, I think, as well.
Well, there's a really neat, I say neat, there's a really interesting back piece of information there. And when we did that little EVP session, what you saw was my question. But what we did is we went in a circle and we all asked a question, doing a burst session, EVP session. Everyone asked a question, and I asked the first question, and it went around. And then Doogie was about to turn off the recorder, and I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "For some reason, something's come to me to ask another question, and I want to do that real quick." And so I asked the question about who was the leader of our country that addressed the nation at the end of the war that stayed across the way. And so we played it back, and we got the EVP of Abraham Lincoln on that question, which was amazing. I mean, it was intellectual, it was direct. I mean, there was no time lag between it. I mean, it was amazing. But the piece that the audience did not get to see or did not get to hear about in that episode or in that scene was in the museum directly above where we were doing that session. There was a shadow box on the wall, and inside that shadow box there is a letter that is signed by Lincoln and his Secretary of War. Wow. There was a tintype photo of Lincoln. There was a letter that Lincoln wrote, and the most pivotal piece that was included in that shadow box is a lock of Lincoln's hair that was taken from his head the day he was assassinated. Mm-hmm. There is only known to be 2 of those locks remaining. One is in the Smithsonian Institute. This one is there at the Mason-Dixon Militaria, and it is certified by the Secretary of the Library of Congress, and I can't remember who all else now, but there's a whole 3-ring binder full of documentation saying that that hair has been DNA tested and is verified to be that of Lincoln. So there was a connection there to Lincoln, a connection to the entire area of Lincoln, and a connection to my question about Lincoln. So all of that together is such an event that I can't even explain how it made me feel.
No, it sent shivers up my spine, especially as I was quite proud of myself. Being British, my knowledge of American history isn't as hot as my knowledge of British history. And when you asked that question, I'm sitting there watching it thinking, it was Lincoln, wasn't it? It was Lincoln. This is like being on a quiz show. Was it Lincoln? Was it Lincoln? And I was quite pleased I was right. Even if it was the spirit that told me I was right.
Sometimes they'll let us know.
They will. They will. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not when I'm picking the numbers for the lottery. I asked them to help me out on this, and they haven't yet. So, if you could choose 5 places in the world to investigate, where would they be?
Oh my gosh, I'm a huge history nut. So anything to do with history, anything to do with a sort of speak, a treasure hunt or something, some kind of mystery. Mm-hmm. So as I go through the list, I think that the Great Pyramids would be a location that I would love to investigate because mm-hmm. of their historical significance, their connection with death and the afterlife, their connection and the theories of energy there. Mm-hmm. I think those would be amazing. Any of Vlad's castles, Dracula,
okay. Yeah.
The Impaler. I think any of those locations where they experience such brutality and death, I think would be a location that I would love to investigate. Anything dealing with either the Holy Lands, the Mount of Olives, okay. Jerusalem, anywhere like that, I believe, just because of me and my Christian faith, I think would be an amazing place to investigate. Okay. Anything to do with ancient culture. You get into Japanese culture, China, anything ancient, ancient Rome, Greece, any of those ancient areas. That history is so rich. The European countries, anything dealing with that ancient, vast history. Where you have so much more documentation and so much more record than we do here in the United States. Those are on my bucket list as well. Mm-hmm. In the United States, there's something here close to home that we've been trying to investigate for years but have not been successful in getting in there, and that is the Bell Witch Cave.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
To my knowledge, the Bell Witch haunting is the only haunting that's documented to have been associated with someone being killed by a spirit. Mm-hmm. And that's one that's just on the bucket list. I want to get there. I want to do that.
How close is that to you guys in Tennessee?
Oh my gosh, it's less than an hour away.
Oh.
Yeah, and trying to get in there, we've been trying to get in there for years, and it seems like every time we're supposed to go, something happens. The last time we were supposed to...
it's not that you can't go there. It's not that they won't let you go there. It's just it doesn't fit in with the schedule. Right. Well, or
some type of natural thing happens that just is not conducive to doing the investigation. We've had trouble getting in there and getting in touch with people, but also we had it scheduled to investigate. And we had these torrential rains, mm-hmm. and it filled the cave full of water. It did all this other stuff, and so we had to. And we were in filming, and we couldn't film the location, so we actually went and filmed the Old Crow Distillery up in Kentucky in place mm-hmm. of the Bell Witch Cave, because we just couldn't physically get in there to do it.
Okay.
So it's still on the list to try to get there, but. No luck yet.
So is there anywhere in the UK you'd like to come to?
Oh my gosh. Specifically speaking, I think the list is so long, and I don't have it in front of me.
Nicely batted away, that one.
Yeah, I got to bat it away because there's so many locations over there that I would love to do. I've always had a fascination with the Knights Templar, uh-huh. and with their travels around that part of the country. So anything connected to Knights Templar and what they did and what they represented, those would be bucket list locations. I mean, Oak Island on this side of the pond and its connection. Of course, there's a show about that, and I am fascinated with it. But anything to do in connection with those that time period and connected directly to them and the mystery there. Of course, that ties into my Christian beliefs mm-hmm. as well.
Yeah.
But anything that's connected to them would be a bucket list location in the UK.
Well, there's a very good historian that writes about them. I think his name's Dan Jones. It's very good. He's written a book on them. I don't know if you've read it. He's a very, very good historian, and he does his programs that he does as well. Mm-hmm. He explains it in a we were talking. People who sort of Porter and I were chatting earlier before we started recording, and we were saying that one of the reasons that people don't enjoy history is the way it's talked to them. And the thing I like about Dan and the way he presents his programs and writes his books is he does write it in a very, not a simple way, but an easy to understand and a very humorous way as well, which does make it more interesting. And no, he's that's one of his specialities, I believe, the Knights Templar. So yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, shall we talk about Salem now?
Absolutely.
The show that you did for Haunted Towns in Salem, is that the first time you've been there, or have you been before as an individual?
No, that was the first time that we had been there. First time I had been there that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the first time. But it was always a bucket list location as well.
Yeah, because obviously for in American history, the New England, Massachusetts, those areas, they were some of the first areas to be settled, weren't
yes.
they, by the well, it's the Puritans, wasn't it? The Puritanical movement. So that's sort of part of America has probably got the oldest, and I mean, obviously excluding sort of the Native Americans and everything else, but from like the more modern day cultures, that's got the oldest, one of the older areas. It's a very pretty village town from the photos I've seen of it from friends of mine who've been. I mean, the whole of Massachusetts is quite pretty, really.
Yes.
I mean, places like Boston and everything are beautiful areas. But Salem, if I'm right, was in the 1692 to 93. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, yes.
Yeah. And basically it was to do with, in effect, some young girls who were known as the Afflicted, who started to say they had spells being cast on them and that they were possessed. And they literally started pointing their finger at different villagers, saying they were responsible for the spells. What I did like about the episode is you started talking, you were all sitting in the Witch's Brew Cafe, which I quite like that. I quite like that. Yeah. That did make me smile. But one of the first shots was you and Brannon in the graveyard, and the two of you did seem quite in awe of the age of the graves and the dates and everything on them. What was your first impression walking through that graveyard?
Wow, I would say when I first pulled up, and I do this at almost any place that I go that is of historical significance, I try to put myself back in the time. And you're looking at some of these gravestones, and you're looking at the dates on there, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is 300 years ago, and in some cases I think there were some that were even older. But it was amazing to sit there and think about, how people were there without modern conveniences, and how they were able to do the things that they did, and what they experienced, what they lived through, and all of the conflict they faced, out in the area, the unknown, and then dealing with the conflict that was internal to them, and how much unrest may still exist, and I think that the feeling that I got was an energy that was really strong, because I can, you just walk into a place or you go to a place and you just feel things, and for me it was just it affected me. It was a very heavy thing. It was almost like there were stories that just weren't told or were told incorrectly, but I didn't really know which ones those were, but it's definitely a location that since then I've been back to Salem a couple times.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I feel like there's still something that's unfinished there. I don't know what it is yet. I'm still trying to find out. But it was something that drew me there, and it's still drawing me there for some reason. So, but it's a strong feeling. And so I think that as I was standing there, it was in awe, and it was, I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to deal with what it was I felt and why I felt the way I did. But it's maybe as time goes on, I'll go back a few more times and maybe I'll figure it out.
Maybe. Yeah, so I must admit, I did enjoy seeing the looks on yours and Brannon's faces when you were sort of saying, and Brannon was saying, I've never seen gravestones this old, and it's almost like the haunted house thing, and
yeah.
I do enjoy that kind of whoa sort of see when people see it. I mean, I'm investigating an old house this weekend that was built in the 1400s, so that's going to be quite an interesting one because it's had quite a lot of different things going on in it. But it's one of the things I think in the UK we forget sometimes, that because we have got the history that goes back over 1,000 years, and we can still visit things that are that old, almost become a bit complacent sometimes. But from the graveyard, let's go to Pierce Farm, which was where Mary Eastie was arrested. Now, I believe there was over 200 arrests in total during the witch trials, or something along those lines, and around 10% of them, there was about 20 executions.
Yes,
in
both men and
forms. Men and women. I think the statistics I looked up, there was like 14 women and 6 men, or something along those lines. But there were people who also died in prison whilst they were awaiting potential execution. In fact, even one of the women, I can't remember what her name was off the top of my head. Sarah Good, I think it was, actually had a baby whilst being held in prison, and the baby sadly didn't make it.
Didn't make it.
Which makes it even more horrific in my view, especially as it was quite interesting. One of the summaries you said is that that it was, if you look at it, is most of the members of the afflicted, i.e. the people who were pointing the finger, were all members of the same families, and the people they were pointing the finger at were people they were having maybe land disputes with or work disputes. And that's something I mean, when you look at some of the other famous witch trials in the UK, the Pendle witch trials, for example, some of the women there who had the finger pointed at them, one of them was one who was contesting with a local landowner that he'd stolen some of her land. And she ended up being executed for being a witch because she stood up to him and said, no, that was my land you've encroached on. So I found that quite an interesting observation, that it was just a way of getting rid of people as opposed to genuine, and using a mass hysteria to get rid of them. Yeah. But Mary Eastie, she was discovered in the basement of Pierce Farm, I believe. Now, her story is even more interesting because her people said that her spirit vowed vengeance on those who... supposedly some people reported her spirit saying that she was going to get her own back, and that's what stopped the witch trials in the end.
You know, and too, she was a religious woman. You know, and you look at these people who were executed for this, and they were very, many of them were very religious people, and they had no negative or ill will. And as you were saying, these disputes occurred, and whatever it may be, whether some of them were they were connected to land and money. There was battles over between pastors, men of God, to try to. It was based upon parishioners and how many parishioners they had, and the money that was coming into the church or the organization. So you had this personal effects encroaching upon what should have been something so pure and faith driven, but it was used for personal gain. And so those things kind of stirred this whole pot. And then you have, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank of her name, the one that was accused of being a pig.
Alice.
Wasn't that
Alice Parker?
Alice Parker. You have that scenario where Alice was trying to get her husband out of the bar, and he's in there drinking with his buddies, and so then his buddy accuses Alice of appearing to him as a spectral pig, and it was the body of a pig and her face on the pig, and so then she was taken away, and it was because he didn't like the way that she was talking to his buddy as who was her husband, and it was a way for people to get people out of their way. Yeah. And it's sad that our society at that point in time was using that to do that. And I always tell people that, that as we learn and discover, we find that our discoveries and our science grows, and that stuff wouldn't happen today, but it happens in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But back then, if I'd have come to you with a lighter in my hand to light your tobacco that you were smoking, and I had that big lighter, you would have accused me of being a witch because I held fire. And so there's things that we learn as we grow as a society and evolve. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do. We have to look at history to know where we came from, so that we don't repeat it, and so that we don't want to hide that history. And so much of that history gets hidden to time because people don't address it, they don't research it, they don't discover it. Just like in this case, people have always said, well, they were accused of witchcraft, and it wasn't they weren't witches, but people were accusing them because of these things that were happening. And all through my education, I never understood that there was a connection between the families and their internal conflict until I did the research and we did the show. And so that was really neat to see that paradigm existed back then, that these people were here in a land that were trying to survive, but yet there was still that internal conflict, and they were using something that was causing hysteria to try to accomplish their personal goals rather than to try to work together to survive.
Yeah. No, it's. I think a lot of these big trials. Say, I know the Pendle Witch trials was a similar one. It was literally families against families, and using whatever tools they had at the time to get the end, like you say, the end result that they wanted. But when you were at Pierce Farm, you guys did a bit of a vigil in the library, and there was quite a few whoa moments with the Ovilus in the library.
Yes.
When the word marry and sacrifice came up, Mary obviously being very, very close to Mary. And then I think someone asked, I don't know if it was yourself or Chris or Doogie, I can't remember which of the three of you it was you asked, but you said something about, what do you mean about sacrifice, blah, blah, and then the word slain came up. And then the one that really sort of, it actually did make me sit up and go, oi, okay, was Alice. Bear in mind that Alice and Mary were both executed on the same day. Can you remember how you guys felt when that all happened?
Oh my gosh. It was, we had been doing our investigation, and so, as happens so often, we start an investigation and we don't get a lot of interaction, we get some. And so then we kind of brought ourselves together, and we were going through this series of questions to try to figure out what we were dealing with, who was there with us. And when those terms started coming across the Ovilus and the phonetic generator, it started kind of painting a picture. And you get and everybody, people that use those things, they know how they work. Sometimes they'll spit out random words that mean nothing. And then sometimes you'll get an Easter egg, is what I call it. And you get a little thing that pops in there that's like it's connected, and so you're okay. So that term means something to this investigation. But when we had that device upstairs, we had another device downstairs that Brandon had running, and as those terms started coming through, it was like this whatever's here with us is actually learned to use this device and is telling us a story. They're confirming that the spirit that's here that we're dealing with is connected somehow and has a knowledge of what occurred. And then we had I can't remember the exact term we got on the phonetic generator, the Ovilus, but I thought Doogie and I thought we heard something in another part of the house, and we were curious to that, and so Brandon went and checked that device, and it had the same it had a term on it that was relevant to our line of questioning. So it was very interesting that whatever entities were there were interacting with both devices in different locations of the house, and so I mean we were in awe. We were amazed, because to have something that strong and that connected is not the norm. That's outside of the normal realm of evidence that you get. Because we look for those tiny little things to listen to check out, and this This was kind of in your face. We have a story to tell. We want you to know who we are and why we're here.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you the pieces of the puzzle to put together so you know who you're talking to.
Well, poor Mary. I mean, she must have been absolutely terrified to be hiding in her basement, knowing, you know, most people who were arrested for witchcraft probably didn't expect to walk away. And if they did walk away, they'd be ostracised by their community anyway because, well, there's no smoke without fire. So, you know, the energy that the fear must have created has got to still resonate there. I just can't imagine the fear these women and men would have gone through when they knew the finger was being pointed at them. But I did like you mentioned about Alice Goody Parker and the spectral pig, or the ghost pig, as I wrote down in my notes. Although, you know, having a laugh, I don't know if you ever saw the Simpsons movie with the spider pig walking across the ceiling. As soon as you guys said ghost pig, the song Spider Pig started playing in my head, which is, you know, I do take this seriously, but, you know, I can't help the way my mind goes sometimes. But but you were in Cinema Salem, which used to be a tavern, was a tavern, it was built on the site of a tavern that was there in the late 1600s. And Alice Parker, I believe the story goes that her husband John was there getting a bit drunk with his mate John Westgate, and she came in to tell him to come home. And next thing that happens is John Westgate testifies that he saw a spectral pig, or a spectral hog, whatever you want to call it, outside that had a hog's body, but Alice's face. So therefore Alice gets arrested for witchcraft, Alice gets executed for witchcraft.
Yes.
Now, what was interesting is you had a lot of torch come flashlight activity. I think they even started as you weren't even asking questions. You were looking at, if it was the witness statement from John Westgate, which must have been fascinating to be able to have seen, actually reading a document that's like, well, sort of 350 years old. You know, I admit I was drooling a bit as you were getting to read that on the big screen. That would be the only thing one step better would be to actually look at the original document in front of me and being able to look at it. But, you know, I'd have been happy with the document on the screen. And I think the Mel meter started going off quite a lot. And then you started getting torch work. And then you had the word deal come through.
Yes.
Now, what was the conclusion that you guys came to, that who that was and what they were saying?
You know, in doing that investigation, we went through there, and of course, Brandon and I were trying to figure out, you know, who we were interacting with. You know, we had some hypotheses and some ideas about speculation about who we were dealing with, and you know, and maybe there was you know, some sort of deal between John Westgate and his buddy there, Alice's husband, and you know, or some other type of deal. But when we were in there, and I don't recall it being part of the show, which there's always little pieces of the puzzle that don't get aired for one reason or another. But throughout that investigation, we had those flashlight interactions. We had the K2 interactions, and they seemed to be centralized in the middle of the theater, which would have been where the tavern would have been. So that was ironic. And as we were leaving there, and we were wrapping up, and Brandon and I were doing our quick what they call them, in the moment, OTFs, on the fly, or whatever you want to call them, interviews where we're talking to the camera and we're talking about our experiences. I was talking about Alice and was talking about what we had experienced there, and kind of what we thought, how the deal evolved, or how they wanted to, you know, get rid of Alice, and that maybe that there was some kind of connection to maybe there was some other type of agreement to get her out of the picture. And as I was talking about that to the camera, I felt something grab me by the shoulder, and I literally spun around because I thought somebody was trying to get rid of me. I just stepped over out of the way. I was like, "Oh, excuse me." I thought somebody walked behind me trying to get by, you know, one of the crew members or something. And when there was no one there, I looked and I was like, okay, well, maybe I hit the wall. The wall was so far away from me that there was no way that I hit the wall. And and then all of a sudden I just realized that as I was talking about that, something grabbed me by the arm, kind of to say, maybe, yes, you're on the right track, or, you're going down, you're getting to the right tree, or you're starting to get some of the information, or, maybe this is, keep talking, keep telling, or something was verifying or trying to interact with me at that moment when we were already finished. And we were just putting our conclusions together. So, I think maybe there was some type of an agreement. Maybe there was some type of ulterior motive that was at play there, and maybe we didn't get into the depths of it, and maybe we somehow need to go back and look at that. Yeah. But it was a very interesting interaction as I was talking about there being some type of underlying agreement or something to get rid of Alice Parker.
Well, the thing is, the spirits don't know the cameras have stopped rolling. They don't know it's not going to be. They're not performing for the show. They're interacting with you as individuals. So, and if you're the first person that's actually cottoned on to the fact that basically Alice's husband and his best friend decided that they'd rather he was single and able to go out and drink and be merry without her, and that was the easiest way to get rid of her. If you're the only one who cottoned on to that, they probably are going to be going,
oh, thank goodness.
Thank you. So
right.
At last.
We may actually get to rest after this story gets out. Maybe this is what they wanted to get out,
Yeah, we just got to find out about the other 18 people now, haven't we, really, and get their stories across. But no, it was a very interesting episode, I must admit, and I've known bits about ever since I watched the Winona Ryder film about it. That's based on the Crucible or something like that. That I sort of started reading up on it, but it's always interesting to watch modern day accounts of stuff that's happening there and seeing the different buildings and hearing the stories. And it was a very, very well. All the episodes that I've watched have been interesting. So,
well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, the thing is, Porter, you and we're kind of two peas in a pod, really.
Yes.
Because my show's kind of the same thing you talk about doing it, looking at the history and then looking at the paranormal and supernatural things and seeing if if they're related or if people think they're seeing stuff, because that's kind of the whole premise of Haunted Histories. So, we are, it's interesting to see a show that does have the historical side to it rather than just a sensationalist sort of stuff.
You're right. I mean, that's it. It's that's one of the things that I love about this. You look at some shows, and everything is a demon, everything is negative, everything is about the attack.
Everything's
and I'm not calling any.
Every orb.
Everything's an orb.
Yep.
I've got a great orb story. I'll tell you after this, but you'll love it. So remind me to come back to it. So. But everything is something that is negative or bad or it's this horrible interaction, and there's no story trying to be told. And so as we were evolving from Ghost Asylum into Haunted Towns, you were like, there's stories to be told. These locations, these individual locations that people say, oh, this place is haunted by this person and this place is haunted by this person. But we as individuals, we travel. We move around. Yep. I go to the store. I do things every day. I do routines, and there's places that I enjoy and places I frequent. It's not just one place. So is there a connection between these haunts? Is there an underlying story or underlying connection between these locations and maybe they're all haunted by the same thing, and maybe if it's not an active haunt, maybe it's something that's residual, maybe it's something that's repetitive, and there's some kind of imprint that we're seeing. And so if we can put together that story and do the research, I love history, I love digging into that knowledge, and if we can do that, I think the audience is going to love that as well, and I think they embraced it, and I think everybody loves that. So
I think it appeals to two different types of audience as well. It appeals to the ones who've just got the paranormal bias, but then it also appeals to the ones who've got the history bias. So it gets the history people asking more questions about the paranormal, and hopefully it gets the paranormal ones asking more questions about the history. So it kind of it appeals to different types.
Yes, yes, it does.
Which,
No, yeah, it does. It appeals to different types and people, and hopefully, going through this and showing those connections, it helps people to embrace history and want to learn more, and look at it analytically, and realize that it's not just factual history. There's a story, and if you dig deep enough, you'll find an underlying story, because that's just life. That's how it is. People aren't always face value. There's sometimes there are underlying reasons why people do things, and if you look at that data, sometimes there's connections that help you figure that out. Just like here in Salem. I've got to tell you my orb story before we get off this piece, because you'll love this. We had an investigation years ago where, speaking of orbs, and this gentleman had an orb. And he was convinced that it was the orb of a great American leader that was visiting his house, and he was showing me the eyes and showing me the beard and all this, and he was convinced it was an orb. And I said, most orbs, in my experience, are either moisture related, dust related, or animal related, like a bug, insect related, And so he said, "Oh, not this one, not this one. This is definitely an orb of this famous leader of America, and you can see his face right there, and that's it. And you can see this. He doesn't have a nose, but you can see the rest of the features all match up perfectly with him, and this and that." And so I took those and I started looking, trying to figure out what it was. And sure enough, I mean, it appeared to be a beard, and appeared to be some eyes there, and something else, and it just the way it looked. And as I started thinking about it and the time of year, I thought, well, that's a very, very bug-rich atmosphere. And I started looking at insects to the region that would be out like that would be tiny, that might be hard to see. And what I discovered is when I overlaid the facial features of a gnat with this orb, there was such a coincidental matchup there, that what he was doing, he had caught a picture of a gnat's face.
So which American leader looks like a gnat?
Exactly.
Which one is it?
He had thought it was a Civil War leader. He thought it was Robert E. Lee, and so he thought it was Lee. And as I looked at the image and I looked at the insect, I was dying. I was like, okay, I can see where you would think that this could be Lee. I can see where you can think that, because it wasn't very clear. It was a gnat's move and the way they photograph. If you don't have the right type of lens, you're not focused. And I could see that. But when I looked at the gnat, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a gnat. And I went back to him and took that evidence, but he wouldn't take that. He wouldn't believe it. He was still dead set that it was Lee. And I was like, you can believe what you want to, but I still think it's a gnat.
So the thing was this guy a Confederate or was he a Unionist?
I'm believing that he was probably still hanging on to the Confederacy. So,
okay. That's quite funny.
He loved the aspect that maybe Lee was visiting his house. So that's okay. That's okay.
No, I've seen. I mean, it does seem to be an infatuation with orbs on all the paranormal Facebook pages. People are adamant they're capturing hundreds of orbs floating around their room. And there was one woman who this story isn't as funny as yours, but poor lady, she had a severely disabled son. He was in his 20s. He's not got long to live, so she has infrared cameras up in his room so that they trigger if he moves around in his special bed and all that kind of thing. And she was adamant there was loads of orbs appearing on the camera, and somebody said they're not orbs, they're just when he shifts there's dust coming up from his bedclothes. It's perfectly normal. She got so irate as she thought people were accusing her of not cleaning properly, and someone said, you do know what creates dust, don't you? You can't not have dust in the atmosphere. It's impossible. She got very upset because she was adamant they were spirits ready, looking after her son, ready to take him. So the group just stopped saying to her, no, they're probably not, love, just to sort of keep her peace of mind. But she did get very, very angry that people were insinuating she didn't clean properly. So, but a gnat
she took offense to it.
Yeah, she did. It's not. I'm not joking. Actually, she did. I remember the post. They had to ask her to leave because she got so angry. But
oh my gosh,
an orb that's actually Robert E. Lee. That's quite. Yeah, that's quite amusing. That is quite amusing. The Dukes of Hazzard would have been proud.
Yes, they would have.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Porter. Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate it. We'll have to get you back on later in the year and we can talk about something else if you're up for it.
Absolutely. It has been a pleasure talking to you. I've enjoyed it thoroughly and would be happy to come back.
And maybe you're going to have a word with Muscles for me as well. See if we can
there we go.
Get his fan club happy. You know, I'll get all of you on at different times, get all your individual fan clubs happy. But I reckon between you, Porter, you're sorting the history passion out on your side of the pond. I'm sorting it out on my side of the pond. I've got friends sorting it out in Australia. Between us all, we should have world domination.
Absolutely.
So that's the
Our
goal.
forces combined.
Our forces will combine, yes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I really, really do appreciate it. And Porter has got an official Facebook page that if you want to drop him a line or, you know, ask him a question, I'm sure he'd be happy to see your request. But don't forget, catch up on Haunted Towns if you haven't already. They're always showing old episodes of Ghost Asylum as well, which are really, really interesting shows, even though sadly Chasey Ray isn't with us on the show anymore, is he? He's a family man now.
Yes.
But it's they're still always a pleasure to watch. But all that really leaves me to say is thank you so much for listening to Haunted Histories tonight. If you do have any questions on the show or you want to feedback anything, please just drop us a line on our Facebook page or via our website. It's entirely up to you. And don't forget, we've got shows on 6 nights of the week, all repeatable on Spreaker and on YouTube. And all that leaves me to say to everyone is good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.